I'm currently doing research into Australia's settlement patterns, and I'm forecasting it out to about mid-century. So I'm working with ABS figures regarding Australia's growth, and trying to, to sort of dispassionately and sensibly understand how we might deal with population growth on a fairly massive scale, and where might be the best parts of the entire landmass of Australia in which to encourage people to settle. How should we develop our cities into the future? And but before I get to that, I'm going to talk about that. I am going to come down from that scale of the nation to Perth, because we're all interested in Perth, of course. I appreciate that. What I'm intentionally not doing is coming down to the scale of your particular area. I'm not talking about Cannington. I mean, there's currently a lot of work going on in that area, and next week there'll be workshops, and we've been doing some analysis and so on, but I thought I would just use the opportunity to address you tonight by giving you, let's think of it as the larger context to the way in which we make local decisions. I want to try and provide you with a much larger context in which you can make those decisions. And therefore, I'm starting with the global situation before I get down to even the Australian situation, because there's a couple of very interesting things going on. Ever since human beings stopped moving as nomadic peoples and started building cities, villages, then cities, that was about 10,000 years ago. Ever since then, settlement has incubated human beings, because we had a surplus supply of food from agriculture, and the consequences were quite dangerous because we always denuded the landscapes around our cities. It was always a problem. Cities have always been a problem. It was never easy sailing. Never sure if you could get enough food. But when we did have surplus food over that long historical period, what has happened is cities have incubated people. We've grown population for 10,000 years. Now, the most interesting thing that's going on this century, I reckon, is that for the first time in that 10,000 year history, population growth is predicted to stabilise. Cities will no longer grow people, incubate people. And this is a phenomenon whereby most demographers agree on this, that the creation of cities and the migration of people from rural areas into urban environments that is occurring all over the world as we speak, South America, China, India, so on, puts a damper on population growth. So, you can look at China and think, oh, it's out of control, it's building cities, and in actual fact, in some ways, it's a good thing, because the human race might, for the first time in the history of settlement, stabilise. And the reason I say that's interesting is because then it becomes, it's no longer a big story about continual progress and growth in terms of numbers. It's then going to become a story. I say story, I mean, social, political, philosophical, technical challenge. How do you sustain 10 billion human beings? We currently have 6.5, okay? Now, you all know that the planet is hemorrhaging at the moment with 6.5, and there's a radical inequity between the distribution of wealth. There are those in the first world that have a lifestyle such as us, and there are billions of people, in fact there are 1 billion people, that currently are malnourished, right? It's predicted by mid-century there'll be about 2 billion that won't have access to potable water. I mean, stuff we just take for granted. So there's huge global inequities, and that's going to be the problem, because how do you, and there'll be geopolitical conflict based on resources, on simple things like food and water, because we're now in the midst of a food crisis and a water crisis with 6.5 billion, and yet we've got to go to 10 billion. So it's not just 10 billion people surviving on a little bit of dirty water and a bowl of grain. It's 10 billion people who will expect to live the way we do. All right? Now, unless you're going to stand up in front of a lot of those billions of people and tell them they don't have the right to live the way we take for granted, with wealth and holidays and technology and so on and so forth, then we've got to work out how on earth, literally, we're going to distribute wealth and information and technology, and so that 10 billion people can lead just a decent lifestyle. So that's the kind of, and the environmentalists will generally give you a pessimistic view of that. Like, this is not going to work, the planet's going to break down. I'm not a pessimist, I'm an optimist. I believe that human beings are extremely intelligent, creative things, and even if they're not, then they're rat cunning and they will work it out, So, but it'll be messy because the pressure is immense. You can't stop this population growth unless you're in the business of genocide, which probably none of you will be. Look, I ask my students regularly to make images for me of the future, the way they feel about it or see it. And I tend to get images like this. You can't get these lights off, can you?
So, without, do you mind if we turn them all off?
Oh, I think it's much better when it's dark and you've got really strong images, Unless someone wants to take notes or gets nervous in the dark, it's going to be better because the images, it's just that one. We just have to knock that one out, really. And so I asked them to make images, and I tend to get images like this, which what you can notice is the top half of the image, it could be Perth, it's kind of okay, it's sunny and there's the Indian Ocean. The bottom half of the image is clearly apocalyptic. Yeah, that's good. See, down here, we don't have time to dwell on it, but it's divided through the middle, if you like. This is the sort of appalling future that we might be moving into, and that's the kind of rosy image of progress. It could almost be the image from Mount Eliza looking at Perth. Well, it's not, but And I'm going to reinforce the kind of the dual nature of this image with two quotes which represent the hysterical nature of the population debate in this country. And I want to get around that pretty quickly and get into the meat of the presentation, but I do need this sort of background hum to things. Here are the two quotes. Up the top is Harry Triguboff. Harry Triguboff is a developer in the eastern states. Now, Harry says, no worries, Australia should be 100 million people, okay? He also says we should re-engineer the rivers. It's not a problem. And we have musical accompaniment tonight, that's good. Now, down the bottom, you've got another quote from a very famous population biologist from the United States called Paul Ehrlich, and wrote a famous book in the 70s called The Population Bomb. He was in Australia recently, and he made the comment, this was when Rudd was talking about Australia being 35 million people. And Paul Ehrlich made the comment that, don't talk to me about 35 million, you people are going to have to evacuate. You're in the most arid part of the world, there are clear environmental limitations, you just can't continue to live this way with climate change and your carbon footprint and all the rest of it. Now, I reckon both of those points of view are extreme. On the one hand, we're being told by an expert we should evacuate, and on the other, we're being told we can just grow to 100 million people. So you get this kind of boyish, boosterish, attitude on the one hand and a dire environmental pessimism on the other. I'll give you the middle ground, which I think is where things are at. And this is at least the most reliable sort of datum on which I can base my work at the moment. In 2002, CSIRO concluded that there's enough water, enough food, enough land, enough energy to provide what it referred to as a moderate lifestyle for 50 million Australians. So CSIRO kind of put their cards on the table and said this country, with its distinct environmental limitations, can sustain 50 million people. Now, it's true that Australia can currently we do feed 50 million people, we just export a lot of that food. So that'll change as population grows. We only feed 50 million people though because we dump 200 million tonnes of phosphates onto the land every year, which has dire consequences downstream for the receiving environments. So, agriculture is going to have to reinvent itself in the future globally in order to get enough yield to feed not just a few Australians, but the 10 billion people that I introduced the talk with. So, whether you like it or not, it's going to be a genetic future, because the land as it is just can't pump out that much nourishment. Now, the thing about the quote that I've got there from CSIRO is, I reckon they should have put a footnote against the word moderate. You know what I mean? They should have disqualified what they meant by moderate. Because I and these people are not moderate. Not many of us are moderate. And I don't know many politicians that are going to stand up and tell us to be more moderate. There are some things you can do with regard to sustainability through behavioural change, but not a lot. If we're going to work this out and be smarter about resources, mindful of global equity, within environmental limitations, I think we've got to design our way out of it. I would say that because I come from a design background. I think we can creatively and intelligently innovate our systems so that we can become more sustainable. And I don't mean sustainable in a kind of miserable, environmental, medieval sense. You know, I don't think sustainability is going to work if it's punitive. You know, the first thing if someone tells me I can't do something, I'll have a go at doing it. So anyway, what most Australians and certainly West Australians perceive as a moderate lifestyle is something like this. This is not a big flash home. That's not a McMansion. There's no real pretensions here. Now that, of course, now in Western Australia will cost you close to $500,000. I mean, it depends on the location, but you know, you get my point. That affordability is a different story, but it's all related, I suppose. Now, the reason I've cropped that image so tightly is to make it to make a point. That's the way we see our homes. My home, my family, my money, my future. I'm aiming to upgrade in a few years. This is an investment. I mean, this is one of the factors that you've got to be mindful of with communities these days, and particularly with the dynamics of the outer suburbs. People don't buy into communities the way my parents did, where they lived in that community for nearly 30 years. People are buying in and trying to get out. I mean, it's all part of a cycle. So anyway, I want to now show you, from an ecological point of view or an environmental point of view, the true image of that property. And by that I mean, I want to show you the actual amount of space that is required to sustain your moderate family of 4 West Australians living in a moderate house. And here it is. The house is now the little red box in the middle. The green space you see is 58 hectares of land. So that's 58 Subiaco ovals, spatially, a bit more than that, but you know, thereabouts. That's the ecological, what we call the ecological footprint, and you can measure this for people around the world. And so if it's 58 for a family of 4, which means each one of us in this room tonight, if you do the math on it, it's 14.5 Subiaco ovals, which I need to sustain one of you, to get your food, deal with your waste, all of the energy requirements, all of the material. The Australian average is considerably less, 8.1 hectares for the average Aussie, and the world average is 2.2. Now, you know, you don't have to be a genius to sort of look at numbers like that and think something's a bit wrong here. If it costs 40, from a global perspective, it costs 14.5 to run me, and yet it only costs 2.2 to run the average world citizen, I'm obviously excessive, and there's an imbalance there. Now, to make the point clearer, I've written here a global aristocracy, because you see that the family living in that red box there, their little moderate home, is a kind of aristocracy. They don't think they are. They're like the old English aristocracy in the sense that when you incorporate all the land necessary to sustain their lifestyle and add it to the house, it looks like that image. They look like the old landed English aristocracy. It's just that green land, all that land there is distributed globally and you don't see it. Now, the other factor to bear in mind, you can run this the other way and think, well, if everyone on the planet, and this is the 6.5 billion, let alone the 10 billion that demographers agree is what we're headed for by mid-century, if everyone lived the way we do now, we would need 5 planets, which I can show you. There it is. Now, that's not going to fly, literally, but what it means really is that this gets back to my point about design and humans being creative and intelligent. We need to kind of get 5 times the stuff out of the one planet we do have, and some, from a global equity perspective and from the population figures that we are now working with and which are agreed upon.